Ladies and gentlemen, that sounds great on face value. And according to international law, that's exactly what happened. But let me bring another perspective into play here. The perspective is as such. When Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in August of 1990, the United States government was in a fix. You see, we had to stand up to him. Why? As then Secretary of State James Baker so accurately said, it's about oil. We can't allow Iraq to go in and take over Kuwaiti oil and then threaten Saudi Arabian oil. No sooner had he said it, though, he was told to shut up. Because if the president looked outside the White House, he would have seen people in the streets with signs saying, no American blood for oil. No, we needed another reason to go to war. How do we explain, though, that we're going to fight a guy named Saddam Hussein, who for the last 8 years has been a good friend of America? How do we explain that we're going to go to war against the government of Saddam Hussein in August, when in April, a delegation of Republican and Democratic senators had traveled to Baghdad and embraced Saddam Hussein as a true friend of the American people? See, the facts are a very difficult thing. Truth is tough to swallow. So you create fiction. You engage in the age-old political practice of demonization and character assassination. Now, it's easy to do with Saddam Hussein because he's an evil man. He readily lends himself to the politics of demonization. So we talked about Saddam as the most evil man on the planet, the personification of evil, the Middle East equivalent of Adolf Hitler. And it resonated in the psyche of the American public. We took Iraq, a very complicated country, and defined it in terms of black and white, good versus evil. We took a nation of 20 million people and quantified it in the person of one man, Saddam Hussein. So that when we said Iraq, the American people thought Saddam. When we thought Saddam, we thought evil. So when we said Iraq, we said evil. That's how we dealt with this situation. We sold the American people on a war with Iraq, not over oil, but of a battle of good versus evil. And we sent American troops off to wage this war. The President of the United States, George Herbert Walker Bush, told the American people that we were confronting Saddam Hussein. We were confronting evil, that this was a crusade. Meanwhile, the international community is passing a law in the Security Council that talks about the liberation of Kuwait. That's what we were authorized to do, liberate Kuwait. So we go forward with a coalition, we wage a war, we liberate Kuwait. And the war ends. Victory is declared. Troops come home. But the American public is sitting there scratching their head saying, excuse me, Mr. President, I thought this was a struggle of good versus evil. I thought you had defined evil as Saddam Hussein. I see a parade of troops in New York City, and Saddam's still in Baghdad. What's going on here? What's going on here? And the president had a political problem that he had to deal with. He had to find a way to get rid of Saddam Hussein. But he couldn't use the tools of war anymore because the war was over. The war was only authorized to liberate Kuwait. So the thinkers in the White House got together, and they assessed the situation. And they said, Saddam's been defeated in battle. His economy's in tatters. We don't think he's going to last more than 6 months, especially if we can give him that one last push. What we need to do is contain Saddam Hussein. We have these things called economic sanctions in place, but the economic sanctions were imposed in August 1990 when he invaded Kuwait, and they were linked to the liberation of Kuwait, and Kuwait is now liberated. How do you respond to that? We need a new justification to keep the sanctions in place. And that justification came in the form of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. The United States decided that they were going to pass a resolution, push for it in the Security Council, calling for Iraq's disarmament, so that they could link economic sanctions to Iraqi compliance, contain Saddam Hussein, and send inspectors into Iraq with a very harsh and strong resolution to challenge Saddam Hussein, to assault his credibility in the eyes of the Iraqi public, thereby promoting the kind of instability that could lead to Saddam Hussein's demise and removal from power. America's policy from the very beginning has been regime removal. This is no new thing. From the very beginning, our policy in Iraq has been removing Saddam Hussein from power. And ladies and gentlemen, I hate to say it, but weapons of mass destruction were simply an excuse to facilitate this goal and objective from the very start. But one of the problems that haunted the presidency of George Herbert Walker Bush and continues to haunt American presidents today is that Saddam Hussein knows Iraq better than we do. Saddam Hussein knows how to shuffle constituencies, how to bully people, how to reward people, how to play the game to stay in power, because Saddam Hussein's all about staying in power. We felt that we could just wait 6 months and Saddam Hussein would disappear. 7 months later, Saddam Hussein's still there, and now we have to deal with this reality. How do we deal with this reality? We go into a policy of containment. Now, containment is not really a policy. Containment is actually the lack of a policy. Containment is not a solution. You just contain. You contain through economic sanctions, and you legitimize the continuation of these sanctions through weapons inspections that are deliberately designed so Iraq can never be found to be in compliance. That's what happened. Now, as a weapons inspector, I can't be involved in that game. My job is to go in, it's a black and white job, disarm Iraq. And Iraq made it very difficult for us because they lied about their weapons. They were obligated to declare the totality of their holdings of weapons of mass destruction so that we could go in with clipboards and count off the weapons and dispose of them. Iraq chose to deny having a nuclear weapons program, to deny having a biological weapons program, to deny having 50% of their chemical weapons, to deny having 50% of their ballistic missile capability. And when Iraq made that decision to lie, they now challenge the weapons inspectors. You see, when we first went into Iraq, it was a gentleman's game. It's a gentleman's agreement. What empowered us to do our job wasn't just the mandate, the law set forth by the council, but the information that Iraq was to provide to us. The information is the fuel that drives inspections. And when Iraq chose to lie and give us false information, we needed new sources of information. Hence the intelligence game. Now, if you looked at my resume, you'll probably, or listen to it, you'll probably notice that there was no terminology like nuclear physicist, chemist, biologist. They kindly referred to me as a ballistic missile expert, but let me tell you, I'm no rocket scientist. The fact is, the first inspectors that went into Iraq had all of these titles. They were there to do a scientific and technical job. I'm an intelligence officer. And when the United Nations turns to people like me to come in and do a job, that means that the rules of the game have changed. The law says Iraq can't have weapons of mass destruction. And if Iraq chooses to hold on to it and not turn it over, then the law authorizes the inspection process to go in and gain access to that information using whatever methodologies and techniques are required. It's not spying on Iraq. And I think we need to make this very clear. When I went into Iraq as an intelligence officer, and I brought my fellow inspectors who were also intelligence officers into Iraq to do our job, we were not spying on Iraq. We were disarming Iraq in accordance with international law. We were gaining access to the information that Iraq was obligated to turn over to us. And we did a darn good job. We viewed ourselves a lot like police officers implementing the law. The law says that Saddam Hussein can't have weapons of mass destruction. Saddam Hussein has lied and held on to these weapons of mass destruction. Therefore, he is a criminal, and we are prosecuting a case against a criminal. Now, while we hold a criminal fully accountable to the rules of law, as we should, likewise, we, the inspectors, the investigators, the police officers, have to hold ourselves accountable to the rules of law.